Okay, welcome back, folks. This afternoon, we're going to hear briefly from State Treasurer Mike Pieciak around some thoughts and questions that we might have around an act relating to the study and design of a long-term care trust fund. Thank you for joining us, Treasurer Pieciak. We appreciate you being here. I think this is your first time testifying in our committee this year, so we're just going to do a quick round of introductions so you know to whom you're speaking. I'm Teresa Wood from Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton, Dulesmore, and Huntington.
And Donahue, Northfield, and also Berlin.
Good afternoon. Dan Noyes, represent Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Good afternoon. Eric McGuire, representative of Rutland City.
Brenda Steady, West Milton, East Milton, Westford.
Doug Bishop, Colchester's Chittenden 20 District.
Good afternoon, Todd Nielsen. I represent Brandon and Forest.
Yeah.
Hi, Mike. I represent Guilford and Vernon, Zona.
Esme Cole of Hartford, good to see you.
Julie McGill, I'm from Bridport and also represent Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
Hi, Mike. Nice to see you. It's Ray Garofano, Essex and Essex Junction.
And I'm Lori Morse, the committee assistant, and we judged History Day together 2 years ago.
I remember we made that poor young guy cry. Sticks with me.
Oh, that was you.
He didn't. The young guy didn't
Royal
win.
we, right? That was just the royal we, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. No. The entire organization.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a pretty brief reel, but I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at H120. But one of the reasons that we've asked you here is, frankly, because of all of your work in establishing other similar but different types of things that benefit Vermonters, whether it's, saving for retirement or it's, some of the other programs that you've been involved with. And, it's no secret to anyone that we have a growing older population in Vermont. And we also know that the commercial long-term care insurance market is unaffordable for some people. And people are finding more and more limitations to the benefit of long-term care insurance commercially available. And thinking about how do we take a look at the things that Vermonters will need as they age, hopefully in place where they would like to be, and how do we do that also without increasing the rolls on Vermont's Medicaid program, which is kind of one of the chief payers for long-term care services in the state. And so we invited you here to talk a little bit about, whether, in the larger scheme of things, whether you see something like this, not necessarily exactly how it's laid out in the bill, but just the overall concept of a long-term care trust fund in some way being studied at all. And if that is something you think is worth doing, would the Treasurer's Office like to be involved in that study?
Well, thank you very much for that level setting. It's very helpful. And I had an opportunity to review the bill and to your point, we've been involved in setting up some programs in the last couple of years. And then previous to being at the Treasurer's Office, being the commissioner at the Department of Financial Regulation for about 6 years, was one of the long-term care insurance, and just the issue generally was one of our top challenges that we faced both here in Vermont and nationally. That segment of the insurance marketplace is really challenged, to the chair's point. So maybe I'll just I think everything you said is 100% true and rings true to me. This is a big challenge for us. We're an older state. The percentage of individuals that have long-term care policies is relatively small. I mean, they're generally at this point reserved for people that have pretty well off, pretty good means, and they have assets that they may want to be protecting. For people that have legacy policies that they issued in the 90s or 2000, early 2000s. There's a lot of big rate increases that are coming down the pike from those. And the Department of Financial Regulation has a great program to help people navigate those rate increases. But at the end of the day, the reason the rate increases are so high is because the underlying cost of the care is risen so substantially. People are living longer. They're living longer with really significant illness. The cost of care, just like medical care across the board, has gone up well above inflation. So all of those things have been a growing challenge for that industry, and it only services a relatively small portion of Vermonters. Then there's a whole host of Vermonters that are in a position where they do have assets and they don't have a long-term care policy. And if they do need care at the end of their lives, they're spending down their assets to qualify for Medicaid. And that's its own unique challenge, because you're in a situation where, so many people at this point are, any sort of wealth that accumulates, and any opportunity to pass that down to the next generation to, have some of the basics like being able to afford a home or send your kids to school, that is lost to medical costs. And that obviously is another really unfortunate thing that happens in these scenarios. And then on the other side, on the bottom of, on the other side of the equation with Medicaid, there are challenges with skilled nursing facilities, as you all well know, being able to stay open with the amount of monies that they can collect through Medicaid. So it's a challenge across the board. I think thinking about creative solutions to make sure more people have money to be able to pay for their long-term care at the end of their lives is important. I think it would be important to think about how a program that's established remains fully funded. You don't want to be in a situation where, and it'd potentially be easy to do in this scenario, because the cost of healthcare, these insurance companies that have a team of actuaries to try to plan for this, they've been wrong, pretty significantly. And that's why you're seeing these big rate increases. They basically don't have enough money to provide the care that they've promised their policyholders. So we just would want to make sure a state system doesn't promise something that it then can't afford to deliver decades down the road. This is not a direct correlation, but we've seen challenges in the past with our pension systems where there is a promise to pay for pension and certain benefits. And when that promise and the reality of the funding didn't keep up with each other, it created an unfunded liability that we're continuing to, wrestle with. We're making good progress on, but it is a big financial cost to the state to be able to retire that unfunded liability. So I think that's just one thing I'd point out, that in this space in particular, it's something that in the design and study committee, you'd really want to think a lot about. How do you design a program so there are some minimum potential benefits, but that you're not in a situation where you can't afford to pay those benefits down the road when a lot of things in this space are really uncertain around cost. And then the other thing I just point out that would be great to maybe think about as well in this study is not just how do you pay for it, but potentially how do you make it less expensive also in Vermont. And I do think the kind of assisted living facilities that we're seeing start to come up in Vermont. There's one that just opened in Vergennes that accepts Medicaid patients, but also accepts paying patients, insured paying patients. So it's a blended mix for assisted living. And that is a little bit more affordable and economical for everyone that's there. And we're going to need more of those facilities, or we're going to see the costs rise, just like we have a shortage of housing and house prices have gone up as a result. In the ensuing decades, if we have a shortage of assisted living and skilled living facilities, it's just, kind of definitionally, if it's not a Medicaid specific facility, you're going to see these costs go up, and it's going to be harder for people to have access to them. So it'd be both an affordability and an access issue, which to some degree it's already happening. So I guess those would just be my general thoughts. 100% agree this is a huge challenge. It would be great to have a way to assist people to pay for this long term. You want to be mindful of the fact that you don't want to create an unfunded liability. And then I think you'd also want to think about how do you make it less expensive, or how can you try to tackle that to some degree as well. So not just paying for it, but trying to get at our heads wrapped around slowing costs or making it less expensive overall.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I think the, needing more of the types of services, like you just described in Virgins, is definitely something that's necessary. And yet on the flip side, we've seen, quite a number of residential care homes that, could potentially serve this type of, provide these kinds of services, because they've been overly reliant on Medicaid to some extent, or people who couldn't afford to pay what the true cost of care was. We've seen them close in the last few years. And so trying to sort of, stem the time, have resources where people are able to, save to a certain extent. I know the bill, anticipates something that would be more like a payroll deduction. Not sure what the appetite for that is. Well, actually, I am sure about the appetite for that. I am sure about the appetite for that, but thinking about a process where people, I know that it's not always popular with some folks, but thinking about a process where people had the ability to voluntarily, make a decision about a payroll deduction or a deposit that went into some sort of state managed account on their behalf. I think, you made a really important point about not making promises that we are unable to keep into the future. And, that's, I think, something we have to be really cognizant of for sure. So if we were to put together some sort of request a feasibility study of some sort, is that something that the treasurer's office would be willing to be involved in?
Yeah, we'd be happy to be on the study committee and happy to provide our perspective and background and expertise as it may be. Again, it's a really important issue to your point, and trying to figure out solutions is important. Important for Vermonters, important for the future of our economy, the future of our state. So happy to play a role. And the one thing I'd mention, Chair, that I didn't before, which is sort of maybe the other side of the coin from the potential liability piece, is that with the pension system, the beauty of that kind of system, or the beauty of, the baby bonds program that we talked about, is you put a certain amount of money in today, and then that money grows over time. So you're really expanding your impact in terms of state dollars. For example, with the pension system, on average across the country, about 67% of payments that are going out in a pension system have been earned through the market returns, not through what an individual employee or employer contribute. Mm. So you would have the potential under a system like this of not just, putting money away and having it be that direct impact that you're stocking away for the future, but having that pot grow so that it is helping a future generation pay for these really important services.
Thank you. Thoughts, Representative Bishop.
So you touched upon something that, as I was looking at the drafts, the bill, I was struck by the collection of funds starting in 2026 for a minimum of 3 years before the benefits would be provided. Later, it talks about the viability of persons being eligible for benefits after paying into the program for the last 2 years. So I think that gets to the point you were making about ensuring that you can cover the liability once you create the program. You mentioned actuaries. I think of polling information on whatever it is, and they talk about plus or minus 3% or something like that. In the world of actuaries, is there some sort of comfort level when they offer something up, well, we're comfortable this within X%. And the reason I ask is, you also mentioned how far off the actuaries for these insurance companies, long-term care insurance companies were off. So is there a norm, I guess, in which actuaries operate within?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we were on with our actuaries earlier today, and we're talking about the pension system and some scenarios about the future, and it definitely was sort of presented in range of likely outcomes. So how likely is this outcome to occur? And they usually do these scenarios into the future, these Monte Carlo scenarios where they're sort of running, hundreds, thousands of scenarios, and then they'll say, there's a 54% likelihood of this outcome happening, or there's a 75% likelihood of the outcome falling within this range, or 95% likelihood of the outcome falling within this range. So that's always very helpful. And actuaries are great, and they provide great service to us in our current office and at the Department of Financial Regulation. But just like anything, like the limitation of looking into the future, it wasn't possible for an actuary in 1980 to understand the interventions that could happen with people that have Alzheimer's, and that some could be early diagnosed with Alzheimer's and then live for really decades after their diagnoses, and the cost of that care. So there are things that can intervene that it's really impossible for the actuary to look ahead the curve and see how things change the assumptions that they're setting as their baseline. So, even though they do present in those range of likely outcomes, there are always factors beyond their view as an actuary, or any of our views in society, that can change some of those fundamental assumptions pretty quickly.
Thank you. Any other questions for the treasurer? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Donahue.
Hi, Mike. This is slightly, it's on topic, but not on topic of this particular program. I've been trying to, scratch my memory, and I can't come up with a more definite picture, and you may from the DFR and so forth. Is the program by which, if you enter in an agreement, if you buy long-term care insurance, you get to protect your assets. And then after 3 years, I think it was, then your long-term care insurance has to cover 3 years, and then you can go on Medicaid if your assets are protected. The trade-off being, otherwise you'd be hiding those assets and going on Medicaid right away. So it saved a lot of Medicaid money by enticing people who had the means to do it to buy long-term care insurance. You familiar with that? That's a very vague description, but it was something we looked at a number of years ago, and I don't know if the mechanism still exists, or whether we should look at it again.
Yeah, it is generally, I would be able to describe it as generally well as you did, Representative Donahue. So I think you got it right. The chair Marcotte in Commerce was very, interested in this, I know, over the years. And I believe Vermont is one of the few states that doesn't have a I think they might call it a partnership. It's like a Medicaid long-term care partnership arrangement. So it predated me at the department, even this conversation is something that's been around for a while. And I think my predecessor at the Department of Financial Regulation, it didn't want Vermont to pursue this. And I think the reason why was that the long-term care policies that were being sold now, and who they're being sold to, was becoming an even smaller and smaller number of, more and more wealthy individuals. So because it was, and that's what the program was designed to do, was to make it more enticing for people to get long-term care insurance. But because it was sort of moving away from most people, I think there was a concern, or I think there was a concern that it just wasn't going to meet the need. And maybe those that would take advantage of it were going to buy long-term care insurance anyway. I think that's sort of the debate. I know we didn't enact, I believe we didn't enact it in Vermont. I'd be surprised if we had over the last
No,
few
we-
years. And,
Yeah, I mean, it came up as a bill, probably, 16, 18 years ago. And at the time, I think it didn't gain momentum. It was kind of it didn't feel good to people because it felt like you're letting wealthy people take advantage of getting on Medicaid after the 3 years. But I mean, the benefits, could have been striking in terms of how much Medicaid money it saved for people who needed it. So it's interesting. I didn't realize that we ended up being one of the very few states who don't have it. So it might be something we want to at least take a look at and understand it better.
Thank you. Thank you, Treasurer Pichek. We appreciate you being here. I know you've got a busy schedule and it's helpful to have your insights as we decide what to do with this bill. And appreciate your approach to thinking about all Vermonters.
well, thank you very much. Thank you to the committee for having me.
Alrighty, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bottom line, if people are going to protect their assets anyway, let's have them do it in a way that saves us Medicaid.
Yeah.
That was always the
I
theory.
always wonder about it also like around kind of like a 529 for college savings where it's like pre-tax and, I mean, I'm just trying to think about ways people put money away. for-
Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Yeah.
About
Yeah.
their needs as they age.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people either don't think about it or they don't have the means
Right.
Yeah.
to be planning.
But there are a lot of people, I think, who would take advantage of the
Yeah, if
opportunity
there
at the
was
same
a-
time. Yeah.
Although
incentive.
if they're needing to save their money in order to save state from paying for their costs later, that lowers the incentive. If the state's always going to be the safety
But isn't
net.
that any retirement
I can tell you though that
savings?
it's only really I
the.
think it's only really the people with significant wealth who really know about those loopholes, to be honest.
Mhm.
No, I'm talking about a plan like
A
this.
plan like this.
Why
yeah.
would you want to put money into a plan like this if it's to pay for something where you didn't have the money, the state will pay for it?
Right.
Well, because it's gonna become unsustainable.
Well, we may know that, but I mean,
Yeah.
I'm turning, in just in terms of the pure individual
Yeah.
incentive, it's kind of like, I mean, it's different when it's retirement in that retirement, other than Social Security, you're on your own.
Yeah.
But in terms of long-term care and Medicaid being a safety net, you're not on your own. You might,
But I mean, Medicaid is supposed to be a safety net for those who can't afford it,
Mhm.
right?
but if you're somebody who's thinking, well, I can't afford it, and you're trying to tell me I should put money aside
Yeah.
to save for it, what's the incentive?
Yeah. I think we need to look at both, what the issues are, but I think that some of those things require more in-depth study. I mean, we're not going to establish a program like this bill calls for. I mean, we need a ton more information
Yeah.
than what we currently have. Even if it's something that's voluntary that people contribute to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
From my experience, it seems like the whole world's on Medicare. And there's some, seems like almost everybody.
Medicaid, you mean?
Medicaid, excuse me.
Yeah.
Maybe 90%?
No.
No, it's not. I mean, it all depends on if it's the rehab unit. Those are almost 100% Medicare, except for private insurance if you're a younger person, like getting a knee replacement or something. And certainly there is a large chunk of Medicaid money in nursing facilities, for sure. Because there are ways, as Ann's pointed out, to protect your assets, but there are also, depending upon the facility, people would rather try to get care at home. And if you're able to do that, and we can support people to do that, it's a lower cost alternative, and most people, not all, but most people would prefer that type of assistance. So And something that was voluntary, that sort of like, you know, if we promoted people to, you know, save for a future that might not be dependent on Medicaid, or might be lesser dependent, you know, you lengthen the time out when they might, because, you know, I know I have family members, we all probably have family members who thought that they were planning and then realized, I've got Parkinson's and dementia, and both my kids don't live here, and, you know, so what do you do? And everybody's got challenges, so. Okay, so for tomorrow morning,
Can I a question before we move on? Do we know whether through H-120, or I think there may be a plan in Washington State perhaps, is this the equivalent or a parallel of a defined contribution or a defined benefit plan, if you know, compares to a retirement?
if I were to look at the way the bill is currently structured, that'd be a defined benefit. If I were looking at something that I think that'd be more palatable, that'd be a defined contribution.
Right.
Although not even a defined, because voluntary, it doesn't require it. So a defined contribution, so state employees, for instance, a defined contribution. So if you don't have the option in state government to not be covered. So something is totally voluntary, is up to you about whether you pay into it. So there are certain groups of employees in state government, for instance, that contribute to a defined benefit plan. And then there are certain groups that can contribute to a defined contribution plan. You don't have the option of not contributing. So that's, you know, I think that, you know, at least in the current climate, I think we'd have to be looking at something that would be totally voluntary, to be honest. I mean, that's where my head's at.
But I'm totally burned right now by the thought of voluntary programs after
I know.
hearing discussions in a Senate committee about that program.
There would still be a cost though, because you still have to have staffing to implement it.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not without cost.
Yeah.
Okay, so for tomorrow morning, we're going to take up markup on H-46 at 9. I know it doesn't say it on the piece of paper you have in front of you, but that's what we're going to do. And we're also, we have a committee project that we're going to do tomorrow morning, probably about, we'll probably do that at 9, and then at 9:30 take up markup, okay?
Committee project.
A committee project.
Ooh.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. We are all done.
But, you know.